Her husband's family stripped her in shame. Then her billionaire father struck back silently. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. The Ward family dining room looked like it had been pulled from a glossy magazine spread. A long polished table ran almost the length of the room, set with fine china, tall crystal glasses, and silverware that caught the light from the chandelier overhead. The chandelier itself hung like a crystal waterfall, pouring warm light over Vivian Ward at the head of the table, over Lydia with her perfect hair and perfect posture, and finally over Mia Collins, who sat halfway down on the right side, trying to pretend she did not feel painfully out of place. Mia smoothed a hand over her dress, a simple soft gray that she had bought on sale, and altered herself. Over it, she wore a light tan coat that she refused to take off, the fabric a little worn at the edges but clean and familiar. Around her wrist, half hidden by the sleeve, a thin silver bracelet glinted when she moved. It was old, not fashionable, and worth almost nothing in dollars. But it was priceless to her, because it had been a gift from her father on a day when he had sworn she would never have to doubt that she belonged somewhere. No one at this table knew that, and she doubted anyone here would care. Voices blended into a soft hum around her, clinking glasses, the scrape of knives on plates. In any other house it might have sounded like family. Here it felt like a performance. Mia. Vivian's voice cut through the noise with sharp precision. Every conversation near them faded a little, as if everyone had been waiting for this moment. Vivian's gaze swept over Mia from head to toe, lingering on the coat. You are still wearing that, she said. It is 70 degrees in here. Are you cold? Or are you hiding? Across the table, Lydia smirked into her wine glass. Maybe she is both, Lydia said lightly, hiding that very, very humble-fashioned sense. A few cousins snickered. Heat crept up Mia's neck. She straightened her back and forced herself to meet Vivian's eyes. I am fine, Mia said. I will take it off in a minute. Vivian set her fork down with a little tap, a sound more powerful than a shout. No, she replied. You will take it off now. This is the Ward family table, not a budget diner off the highway. Mia felt several pairs of eyes land on her at once. She glanced sideways at Ethan, her husband, seated to her left. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched, but his eyes stayed fixed on his plate. Ethan, Mia said softly. It was half a whisper, half a plea. He swallowed, then finally looked at her, just for a second. Just do it, he muttered under his breath. Please. It is not worth a fight. The words stung more than Vivian's tone. Not worth a fight. Not worth making his mother uncomfortable. Not worth raising his voice. Mia inhaled slowly and unbuttoned the coat one button at a time. The room seemed to grow quieter with each small click. As the coat slid from her shoulders, the bracelet rode up her wrist and caught the light. Vivian's eyes narrowed. And what is that? Vivian asked. I thought we agreed you would wear the bracelet Ethan bought you. That little trinket does not match anything on this table. Mia instinctively covered the bracelet with her other hand. It is from my father, she said. It is important to me. Lydia laughed under her breath. Sentimental and cheap, she said. What a charming combination. Vivian did not laugh. She leaned back slightly, her pearls catching the chandelier light. Mia, she said, you married into a family with a reputation. When you sit here, you represent the Wards. You cannot expect to bring your old life to this table and hang it on your arm. If you cannot afford something appropriate, you can at least wear what we have already given you. Ethan's fork scraped against his plate. Mia waited for him to speak, to say that it was just a bracelet, that it did not matter, that his wife had the right to wear something that meant something to her. He stayed silent. Take it off, Vivian said, extending her hand, palm up. The room went very still. The housekeeper paused in the doorway. A cousin lowered his phone. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Take it off. It was amazing how 3 small words could feel like a command to hand over a piece of her own skin. Mia's chest tightened. For a second she thought about saying no. She thought about standing up, about laying her napkin neatly on the table, and walking out with her head high. Then she remembered the look on Ethan's face when they fought in private about his family. The way he had begged her to give them time. The way he had promised that he would find his spine, just not yet. Her fingers shook as she unclasped the bracelet. It fell into her palm, warm from her skin. Slowly, she placed it in Vivian's waiting hand. Vivian's smile was small and satisfied. "Thank you," she said. "Now you look like you belong." She turned and handed the bracelet to the housekeeper without even glancing at it. "Put that away somewhere," she added. "A drawer is fine." Mia watched the last glint of silver disappear through the doorway. For everyone else, it was over. Just a small moment at an elegant dinner. A minor adjustment for the sake of appearances. For Mia, it felt like something invisible had been stripped away in front of an audience that did not care what it cost her to lose it. She picked up her fork again and pretended her food still had taste, unaware that far from that glittering table, someone else had just decided this was the last time she would ever be shamed in silence. That night, long after the laughter at the Ward family table had faded and the chandelier lights had been dimmed, Mia lay awake in the guest bedroom that was supposed to feel like her home. The room was beautiful in a catalog kind of way, with soft cream walls, a king-sized bed, and matching nightstands with identical lamps. Everything matched so perfectly that it felt like nothing personal had ever truly lived there. On top of the dresser, a single framed wedding photo tried its best to prove otherwise. In the picture, Mia and Ethan were laughing, his forehead pressed to hers, his suit jacket open, her hair blown by some stray wind. There had been no chandeliers that day, no critical eyes. Just a courthouse, a handful of friends, and the feeling that they were choosing each other against the world. She stared at the photo and tried to remember exactly when that feeling had started to fade. A knock came at the bedroom door, soft but not hesitant. The knob turned before she had the chance to answer. Ethan slipped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. His tie was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly mussed like he had run his hands through it too many times. He looked tired, but not in the way she did. His weariness came from trying to stand in the middle of two lives. Hers came from being asked over and over to shrink. "You left before dessert," he said, leaning against the door. Mother noticed. Mia sat up against the headboard and pulled the blanket tighter around her lap. "Your mother noticed everything," she replied. "She noticed my coat. She noticed my bracelet. She noticed that I do not fit the picture she has in her head. I think she is very observant." Ethan winced. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, not quite close enough to touch her. "Mia, please," he said. "I told you I would talk to her." "And when would that be?" Mia asked. "Before or after she decides what else she would like to strip off me to make me more presentable?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed it. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "It was not personal," he insisted. "She is obsessed with appearances. She would have done that to anyone who walked in wearing something that did not match." Mia let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "It was not personal," she repeated slowly. "Ethan, she took the one thing I wear every day that actually belongs to my life, to my story, and treated it like a piece of trash that did not belong near her napkins. Your sister laughed. Your cousins watched. You stared at your plate. Tell me how that is not personal." His shoulders slumped. "I was trying not to make it worse," he said. "You know how? She is. If I had confronted her in front of everyone, she would have turned it into a spectacle. She would have made it about how ungrateful you are, how disrespectful I am. I was trying to keep the peace." "The peace for who?" Mia asked quietly. "For her, or for me?" He did not answer that. Instead, he reached for her hand, then hesitated when he saw the faint red mark circling her wrist where the bracelet had been. "I will get it back," he said. "I promise. I will ask her tomorrow. She will roll her eyes and lecture me about standards, but she will give it to me. I will make it right." Mia thought about all the times he had promised to make it right, in small ways that did not cost him anything real. She believed he meant it. That was the hardest part. He always meant it. He just rarely followed through if it meant choosing a side. "Do you know why that bracelet matters?" she asked, not pulling her hand away, but not leaning into his touch either. "You told me your father gave it to you when you were a kid," Ethan said. "You said it was a gift from before things got complicated between you." "He gave it to me on his office floor," Mia said, her voice softening slightly as the memory rose. "I was 12. He had just missed another one of my school plays because a deal was closing, and I was furious. I told him his job always came first. I told him I felt like a guest in his life. He took off his watch, set it on the desk, and pulled out a little box from a drawer. That bracelet was inside. He said, "Every time you feel like you do not belong, you look at this and remember that you always belong to me. No matter how busy I am, no matter how big the world gets, you are not a guest. You are my home base." She swallowed hard. I kept it when I walked away from his world. I gave up the houses and the cars and the last name that opened doors. That bracelet was the one piece I allowed myself to keep, not because of the money, but because of the promise. Ethan's eyes widened a fraction. "Mia," he said, slowly, "are you saying your father is really—" He had heard rumors, of course. Those always circled around any person with a lot of money and a daughter who preferred to live quietly. Mia had never confirmed or denied anything. She had just changed the subject, content to let people think she was a girl from an ordinary background who had gotten lucky. "Does it matter?" she asked. "Here, to your mother, I am just the girl who does not dress right. The girl with the wrong bracelet." She pulled her hand back gently. "I married you because I wanted something different from that world. I wanted a life that was not measured in headlines and stock prices. I never thought I would end up in another house where someone else decides what parts of me are acceptable." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I love you," he said. "I know I am not handling this perfectly, but I love you. I just need more time to stand up to her. I have worked my whole life to earn my place in this family and this company. If I push too hard and she cuts me off, I could lose everything." Mia looked at him for a long moment. "I understand being afraid to lose everything," she said. "I just wish you would remember that I am part of that everything too." Downstairs, the house was quiet. There was no shouting, no open fights. Just soft, civilized cruelty wrapped in pretty words and fine linen. Across town, in a high-rise office where the city lights stretched out like a field of stars, a man stared at a grainy security photo of a woman at a dinner table, her hand being forced open as an older woman took something from her palm. The angle was distant, but the set of the young woman's shoulders was very familiar. Alexander Collins closed his hand around the photo until the paper bent. He had given his daughter space. He had promised himself he would let her live her own life. But as he looked at that picture, all he could think was that someone had just put their hand on a line they did not know existed, and they had crossed it without hesitation. Morning came to the Ward estate wrapped in soft sunlight and the illusion of peace. The house staff moved quietly through the rooms, setting breakfast plates, brewing coffee, arranging fresh flowers in vases that cost more than some people's monthly rent. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Inside, Mia woke with the same heaviness in her chest that she had fallen asleep with. She sat up slowly, rubbing her thumb over the faint red circle on her wrist, half expecting to feel the cool touch of silver that was no longer there. The mark was fading, but the emptiness it outlined seemed to grow sharper. Ethan was already out of bed, standing by the closet, buttoning his shirt. He glanced at her reflection in the mirror, then looked away, as if unsure which version of her he would see this morning, the quiet girl who tried to adjust, or the woman whose patience had been worn thin one humiliation at a time. "Mother expects us at breakfast," he said. She invited a board member and his wife. "It is important." Mia swung her legs over the side of the bed and let her feet rest on the rug for a moment, feeling the softness she barely noticed anymore. "Important to whom?" she asked without heat. "To your career, or to your family's image?" Ethan sighed. "To both," he said. "Please, Mia, just get through this morning. I will talk to her about the bracelet after. I mean it this time." She did not argue. She did not agree either. She just stood, moved to the small vanity, and brushed her hair in silence. As she gathered it into a low twist, she caught her own eyes in the mirror. They looked older than she remembered, not in years, but in the way they held themselves, careful and guarded. 10 miles away, in a penthouse office with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like a model laid out at his feet, Alexander Collins closed the lid of his laptop with deliberate calm. The security image he had been studying all night stayed burned into his mind. It was not the older woman's face that haunted him, or even the bracelet in her hand as she passed it off like a piece of junk. It was the way his daughter's shoulders had curved inward, the way her hand had hung in the air for a moment after the bracelet was taken, fingers trembling in a gesture he recognized from a much younger version of her. He had seen that same posture when she had come home at 13 with a torn backpack and refused to explain why she had thrown the new designer one he bought into the back of her closet. He had sat beside her on the couch, listening as she sobbed about not wanting to be the girl with the expensive bag when everyone else had secondhand ones. Back then, he had been slow to understand what she really needed was not more things, but less distance. He had promised himself he would do better. And then the company grew, the world pulled at his sleeves, and his promises got buried under quarterly reports. "Sir," his driver's voice came gently from the doorway. "The car is ready." Alexander stood, smoothing his suit jacket. It was a dark gray today, understated but flawless. There was no tie. He wanted to look less like the billionaire from the business magazines and more like the father showing up on his daughter's doorstep. Still, there was no hiding who he was. Some kinds of power walked into a room whether you invited them or not. "Let us go," he said. The drive to the Ward estate took less than 30 minutes, but it felt longer. As the car rolled past tidy lawns and towering gates, Alexander thought about all the decisions that had led his daughter here. Her stubbornness, his pride, the way she had looked at him the last time they argued, eyes full of hurt as she told him she needed to find out who she was without his shadow covering every step. He had watched her walk away then. Today, he was the one closing the distance. At the estate, Mia walked out onto the back patio while the rest of the family gathered in the breakfast room. She needed a minute before stepping into another performance. The garden stretched out before her, all trimmed hedges and carefully placed stone paths. The sky was a pale blue, the kind of perfect morning that felt almost insulting when your heart was a mess. She wrapped her arms around herself and stared at the fountain in the center of the yard, watching the water fall in a pattern that never changed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. When she finally pulled it out and glanced at the screen, her breath caught. A short text from a number she had once been able to call without thinking, a number she had stayed away from out of sheer stubbornness. "I am nearby," the message read. "Do you want me to stay away? Or do you want your father at your side today?" Her fingers hovered over the screen. The easy answer was to tell him to stay away, to prove one more time that she could endure whatever the wards threw at her without calling in backup. The honest answer rose from somewhere lower, from the part of her that was tired of standing alone in rooms where no one chose her. Slowly, carefully, she typed back 3 words that made her pulse race as she hit send. "I want you here." Out front, as if the universe had just been waiting for her permission, the tall iron gates of the Ward estate swung open. A black sedan rolled up the driveway, sunlight gliding over its surface. A housekeeper glanced out an upstairs window, eyes widening. Somewhere inside, Vivian's voice floated from the breakfast room, full of false sweetness, completely unaware that the quiet, calculated world she controlled so carefully was about to be disturbed by a man who specialized in moving mountains without raising his voice. The black sedan came to a smooth stop near the front steps, just as Mia stepped back through the French doors into the hallway. Her heart hammered against her ribs in a rhythm she had not felt since she was a teenager waiting to see if her father would make it to a school event or call with another excuse. This time there would be no excuses. She already knew he was here. She could feel it in the way the air in the house seemed to shift, like the pressure had changed. In the breakfast room, Vivian's voice floated through the open doorway, bright and controlled, as she poured coffee for the guests seated beside her. "We are very proud of Ethan," she was saying. "He has worked very hard for his position on the board. Family legacy is important, of course, but we believe in merit." Lydia laughed softly. "Some people marry into the right family," she added, not quite looking at Mia's empty chair. "Others are just lucky to be invited to sit at the table." A housekeeper hurried past the hallway entrance, paused, then leaned back to peer through the glass panels of the front door. Her hand flew to her mouth. The sound of the doorbell rang a second later, a deep, melodic chime that echoed through the house. Vivian frowned, setting down the coffee pot. "Who on earth is that?" she murmured. "I told the staff no interruptions this morning." Ethan glanced toward the hall, a faint line forming between his eyebrows. "I will see who it is," he said, half rising from his chair. Before he could step away, Mia appeared in the doorway of the breakfast room. She stood a little straighter than she felt, the light from the hallway outlining her figure as several pairs of eyes turned toward her at once. Vivian's expression tightened. "Mia," she said, "you are late." We have guests. Mia ignored the comment. Her eyes met Ethan's for a heartbeat, and he saw something in her face that made him sit back down without arguing. It was not anger exactly. It was resolve. She turned away and moved toward the front door, her steps measured, her breath shallow. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the handle, but when she opened the door, her voice was steady. Alexander Collins stood on the doorstep, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a small envelope. The morning light caught the silver at his temples and the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, but nothing about him seemed diminished. If anything, time had only sharpened him. He looked past her for half a second, taking in the expensive foyer, the carefully chosen art on the walls, the echo of voices in the background. Then his gaze came back to her, and all of that seemed to fade. "Hi, kiddo," he said quietly. Mia's throat tightened. She had prepared herself for this, she thought. She had rehearsed lines in her head about space and independence, about how she did not need him to fix her life. None of those words showed up now. Instead, what came out was simple and painfully honest. "You came," she said. "You asked," he replied. He glanced at her wrist, at the faint ring of skin that still told a story even without the bracelet. His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed level. "May I come in?" he asked. It was a small thing, that request, but it mattered. In this house, people tended to walk into her space like it was their right. Her father waited for her permission. Mia stepped aside. "Yes," she said. "Please." As he crossed the threshold, the house seemed to register his presence like a living thing. The housekeeper disappeared down the hall, no doubt to whisper to someone in the kitchen. The distant murmur of conversation in the breakfast room faltered for a moment, then resumed with a slightly higher pitch, like everyone inside could sense that something unexpected had entered their perfect little world. "You look thin," Alexander said, his eyes scanning her face, the way her shoulders held tension. "Are they feeding you in this castle, or do they just starve you into submission?" A surprised laugh escaped her, small but real. "The food is fine," she said. "The company is complicated." "So I gathered," he replied. He held up the envelope. "I brought something for you," he added. "A peace offering, if you will, so you do not accuse me of arriving empty-handed." Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to his face. "What is it?" she asked. "An apology," he said, "and a starting point." Before she could ask more, Vivian stepped into the foyer, followed closely by Lydia and the visiting board member and his wife. Vivian smiled the smile she reserved for people she thought might be important. It was polite but distant, full of calculation. "We were not expecting company," she said. "May I ask who you are?" Alexander turned slowly to face her. The shift in his posture was subtle, but it changed everything. In one moment, he was just a father visiting his daughter. In the next, he was the man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals in rooms full of people who thought they could intimidate him. He extended his hand. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Alexander Collins." The board member choked on his coffee, even from across the room. The wife's eyes widened. Lydia's mouth fell open. Vivian's polite smile flickered, then froze as recognition dawned. The name did not just belong to a wealthy man. It belonged to the man whose company had silently bailed out more than one struggling corporation, the man whom financial news anchors described with words like Titan and ruthless and indispensable. "Collins," Vivian repeated slowly. "As in Collins Global Holdings?" "Among other things," Alexander said calmly. He glanced back at Mia, then returned his gaze to Vivian with a small, cool smile. "I believe you have something that belongs to my daughter." For a heartbeat, the foyer went utterly silent. The only sound was the faint tick of a distant clock and the soft hiss of air through the vents. Vivian blinked, her practiced composure slipping for the first time since Mia had met her. "I beg your pardon," she said, her tone dipping just a fraction. Alexander tilted his head slightly, as if considering how much patience he was willing to extend. "The bracelet," he clarified. "Silver, thin, old, and apparently unfashionable enough to be thrown into a drawer. A gift I gave my daughter a long time ago. I would like it returned." All color drained from Vivian's face except for two bright spots of pink along her cheekbones. Her eyes darted to Mia, then to the board member, then back to Alexander. The calculus was almost visible behind her eyes. "I did not realize," she began, "that the piece had any real value. It looked like a cheap trinket. I was only trying to help Mia present herself appropriately at our table." There was no offense intended. Value is not always measured in what something costs to buy, Alexander replied. His voice never rose, but each word landed with a quiet weight that made it impossible to mistake his meaning. You took something that mattered deeply to her in front of an audience and treated it like it was beneath your standards. That is what I am here to correct. Lydia shifted uncomfortably, her usual smirk nowhere to be seen. The board member cleared his throat, suddenly fascinated by a spot on the floor. Ethan stood frozen in the archway between the breakfast room and the foyer, his face pale. He looked at Mia, then at her father, then at his own mother, as if watching 3 different worlds collide and realizing he belonged to only one of them. Vivian smoothed her blouse with shaking fingers. Of course, she said tightly. I will have it brought at once. She turned to the nearest housekeeper, her tone sharp. Go to the top drawer of the side table in the sitting room. Bring the silver bracelet that is there. Now. The housekeeper hurried away. For a few moments, no one spoke. Alexander stood beside Mia with an easy stillness, as if he had all the time in the world. It was the others who fidgeted, shifted their weight, adjusted their collars. When the bracelet arrived, it lay coiled in the housekeeper's hand like a small, captured thing. Vivian took it between 2 fingers, as if suddenly aware she had mishandled something fragile, then extended it toward Alexander. Here, she said. This is all a misunderstanding. He did not take it. Instead, he looked at Mia. I believe it is hers, he said. Mia's breath caught. Slowly, she stepped forward. The bracelet looked smaller than she remembered, but when she took it from her mother-in-law's hand, the metal felt warm again, like it had been waiting to return to the right place. Her fingers trembled as she fastened it back around her wrist. The faint red mark disappeared beneath the silver circle that had always meant she belonged somewhere. Thank you, she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to her father, to the universe, or to the version of herself that had finally decided she was worth defending. You are welcome, Alexander said, his eyes softening when he looked at her. He turned back to Vivian. Now that this is resolved, perhaps we can be honest for a moment. Vivian bristled. I do not know what you mean, she said. I am sure you do, Alexander replied calmly. You made my daughter feel small in her own home. You took something of hers to prove a point about your standards. I am very familiar with people who confuse cruelty with class. However, there is one difference between you and most of them. Vivian swallowed hard. And what is that? She asked. You did it to my child, he said simply. That makes it my business. The words were not loud, but they carried more threat than any raised voice. Lydia looked like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. The board member's wife whispered the name Collins under her breath like a warning. Ethan finally forced himself to move. He stepped closer, clearing his throat. Mr. Collins, he began. Sir, I want to say I am sorry. I should have stopped it. I should have said something. Alexander regarded him for a long, silent moment. You married her, he said. You chose her. That means your first job is to stand between her and whatever tries to break her down, even if it wears the same last name as you. Remember that. Ethan flinched, shame flickering across his face. He nodded, but the gesture felt small. Alexander turned back to Mia. I did not come here to cause a scene in front of your in-laws and their guests, he said quietly. But I will not pretend that what happened was acceptable. You asked me to be here. So I am here. From this moment on, anyone who wants to belittle you will have to decide if it is worth dealing with me. Mia felt something in her chest loosen, a tension she had held for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. For the first time in that house, she did not feel alone. Somewhere, behind the anger and the humiliation, a small, steady thought took root. This was not the end of anything. It might just be the beginning of her finally choosing where she truly belonged. The tension in the foyer did not vanish when the bracelet returned to Mia's wrist. It simply shifted, settling into a quieter, heavier weight that everyone could feel. Vivian forced a smile back onto her face, the kind that looked good in photos but never quite reached her eyes. Well, she said, voice tight. Now that this little misunderstanding is cleared up, perhaps we can all move on. We have guests, after all. The board member nodded quickly, eager to smooth things over. Of course, he said. It is an honor to meet you, Mr. Collins. I had no idea you were connected to the family. Alexander's eyes flicked to him, polite but cool. Until recently, neither did they, he replied. The board member laughed weakly. unsure if it was a joke. Vivian clasped her hands together. Mia has always been welcome here, she said, each word carefully chosen. We are a close family. We sometimes speak bluntly, but it is always out of love. Mia felt her stomach turn at that, but she said nothing. She did not need to. Her father's presence said enough. Alexander gave a small nod that did not quite qualify as agreement. I did not come to disrupt your breakfast, he said. I only intended to see my daughter and retrieve what belonged to her. However, since I am here, perhaps we should speak more formally later today. Vivian's eyes sharpened. More formally, she repeated. In what sense? In the sense that Ward Enterprises has crossed my desk more than once in recent months, Alexander answered smoothly. There are patterns that interest me. I think a conversation about your company's direction could be mutually beneficial. The words mutually beneficial landed in the room like currency. Vivian's spine straightened. Her annoyance folded, quickly replaced by calculation. Of course, she said. Ethan can arrange something. Our home is not the place for business talk, but we would be delighted to meet at your office, if that suits you. It does, Alexander said. His gaze shifted to Ethan. Can you be in my building at 3 this afternoon? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir, he said. I will make the time. Good, Alexander replied. Bring any relevant financial statements from the last 3 years. Balance sheets, debt structures, charitable activity reports. I like to see the full picture. Vivian's smile turned brittle at the word debt, but she quickly recovered. We will have everything prepared, she said. Ward Enterprises is very proud of its transparency. Alexander did not comment on that. He simply looked at Mia again. Would you like to come with me now? He asked her quietly. The question felt like a hand extended across a chasm. Mia glanced at Ethan. His expression was a storm of worry and pride and something like fear. You are leaving? He asked. Just like that. I am not disappearing, she said. I need some distance. I need to remember who I am when I am not constantly trying to please everyone at this table. Vivian's mouth tightened. You are overreacting, she said. Running away to daddy every time you feel slighted is hardly the sign of a mature woman. Alexander's eyes turned cold. She came here alone, he said. She endured more than she ever told me. Today, she is not running away to anyone. She is walking out on her own 2 feet, with her father beside her because he should have been there sooner. Mia swallowed the lump in her throat. She lifted her chin and nodded. I will pack a bag, she said. I will be ready in 10 minutes. Ethan moved toward her as she turned to go. Mia, wait, he said softly. Can we talk? Just you and me. She paused at the base of the stairs. For a moment, the memory of their wedding photo flashed in her mind, the way he had looked at her like she was his whole world. Not right now, she said. I need a little time where the only voice in my head is mine. She went upstairs without looking back. 10 minutes later, she returned with a small overnight bag and her sketchbook tucked under one arm, the edges of old drawings peeking from the pages. Ethan stood near the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had realized a little too late that silence was also a choice, and that he had been choosing it for a long time. I will call you, he said quietly. I hope so, Mia replied, and she meant it. She did not want him to be the enemy. She just needed him to decide who he really was. Alexander opened the front door and stepped aside. As Mia walked past Vivian, Lydia, and the guests, she felt their eyes on her. But for the first time, their opinions did not feel like chains. The bracelet on her wrist felt cool and steady, a small circle of promise resting against her pulse. In the car, as the Ward estate shrank in the rear window, Alexander watched his daughter breathe out slowly, like someone loosening a tight band around her chest. You did well in there, he said. You held your ground. I felt like my legs were shaking the whole time, she admitted. That still counts, he said. Courage is not about not shaking. It is about walking anyway. She looked at him. What are you really going to do at that meeting today? She asked. A hint of a smile ghosted across his face. That depends on how honest your in-laws have been with the world, he answered. I suspect Ward Enterprises has more cracks beneath the surface than they like to admit. I intend to find them, and then I intend to decide how much of my silence they can afford. Outside, the city grew closer, glass and steel rising up to meet them. Inside the car, Mia rested her hand over the bracelet and realized that whatever happened next, the days of letting other people quietly strip pieces of her away were over. Alexander's office sat high above the city, a wide corner space wrapped in glass and quiet authority. By 3 o'clock, the sun had shifted just enough to cast long lines of light across the polished floor. Mia sat on a low gray sofa near the window, her sketchbook in her lap, the bracelet on her wrist catching the light every time she turned a page. She was not sketching, not really. She was mostly drawing small lines and shapes, trying to keep her hands busy while her mind replayed the morning in the ward house like a movie she had watched too many times. Across from her, Alexander stood behind his desk, reading a file that his assistant had just placed in front of him. His posture was relaxed, but Mia had known him long enough to see the focus sharpen in his eyes. When he worked, the world narrowed down to details and patterns and possibilities. A soft knock sounded at the door. Alexander's assistant opened it just enough to step aside. "They are here, sir," she said. "Send them in," he replied. Ethan walked in first, wearing his best suit and an expression that tried very hard to be confident. Behind him came Vivian, her pearls perfectly in place, followed by a man in a dark suit carrying a leather portfolio. Mia recognized him as Ward Enterprises in-house attorney. There was no sign of Lydia. Perhaps even Vivian understood this was not the kind of room where casual sarcasm would help. Vivian's eyes flicked around the space, taking in the view, the understated art, the quiet hum of power. When she saw Mia on the sofa, her lips tightened. "I did not realize this was going to be a family reunion," she said. "It is a meeting," Alexander said calmly, "with people whose decisions affect my daughter's life. She is entitled to hear what is said about her future." He gestured toward the chairs in front of his desk. "Please sit." They obeyed. The attorney placed the portfolio on his lap, hands folded over it. Ethan sat stiffly, glancing from Mia to Alexander, clearly aware that all of this was far outside his usual boardroom routines. Vivian folded one leg over the other, her heels making no noise on the thick rug, her smile polite and strained. "I understand you have concerns about Ward Enterprises," she began. "We would be happy to clarify anything that seems unclear." "Clarifying is always helpful," Alexander agreed. He opened the file on his desk and turned it so they could see the top page. "For example, I find these numbers very interesting. Your official debt load versus the off-book liabilities linked to 2 shell charities and a consulting firm that appears to be doing no consulting at all." The attorney's face drained of color. Vivian stiffened. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said. "Our philanthropic arms are completely legitimate." "Some of them are," Alexander answered. "Some of them, however, appear to be vehicles for routing company funds into personal accounts, which is not only unethical, but illegal. I assume you did not bring your lawyer just to admire the view." The attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Collins, any discrepancies are minor and will be addressed internally," he said. "There is no need for outside involvement." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Outside involvement," he repeated. "I am not a random outsider. Ward Enterprises approached my firm for a quiet capital injection 2 years ago when your debt ratios became uncomfortable. I declined at the time. Now I am very glad I did. It means I owe you nothing, and my hands are free." Ethan looked shocked. "Mother," he whispered, "is that true? Company funds, through charities?" Vivian shot him a warning look. "We are not discussing internal structure in front of people who do not understand the complexity of corporate finance," she snapped. Alexander's gaze grew colder. "My daughter understands one thing very clearly," he said, "that she was made to feel less than in a house whose wealth may not even survive a proper audit. So here is what will happen next. You will correct these flows. You will refund every dollar that was siphoned under false labels. You will make your books clean, or I will make sure every regulatory body that matters sees what I see." The attorney swallowed hard. "You are threatening to destroy us," he said. "I am offering you a choice," Alexander replied. "And I am adding one condition that is non-negotiable. From this day forward, Mia owes you nothing. No performance, no compliance with your image, no presence at your table unless she chooses it. If she decides to stay with my name and my support, you will not whisper that she is ungrateful. If she decides to return to your house, you will treat her with respect, or you will lose the illusion of security you cling to." Mia stared at her father, stunned. She had expected anger. She had expected a confrontation. She had not expected him to tie her dignity directly to the leverage he held over their company. Vivian opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she had no quick retort. Ethan looked at Mia, his eyes full of regret and something else, something like awe. He was seeing, maybe for the first time, that her roots were deeper and stronger than he had ever understood. "You cannot dictate how we run our family," Vivian said finally. Alexander leaned back in his chair. "Watch me," he said softly. The room went quiet again. This time, it was the quiet of people realizing the ground under their feet had just shifted, and there was no going back to pretending it had always been solid. The meeting did not end with shouting or slammed doors. It ended with signatures. Under Alexander's steady gaze, Vivian and her attorney agreed in writing to restructure the questionable accounts, bring in an independent auditor, and report the findings to the proper authorities before anyone else had the chance to suggest they had been forced. It was a controlled burn instead of a public explosion, but everyone in the room understood who had lit the match. When the last pen stroke dried, Alexander closed the folder with a quiet finality that carried more weight than any speech. "I will have my team monitor the progress," he said. "If you follow through, Ward Enterprises will survive this as a humble but intact company. If you do not, I will assume you have chosen the alternative." Vivian stood, clutching her purse like a lifeline. She looked at Mia, and for the first time there was something like real fear in her eyes. Not fear of Alexander, though that was there too, but fear of losing control over the narrative she had written for her family. "You are really going to do this," she said to Mia. "Walk away from everything we have given you because you feel slighted over a bracelet and a few words at dinner." Mia rose slowly. Her bracelet gleamed against her wrist, a small circle of light. "I am walking away from the idea that I should be grateful while I am being diminished," she said. "I married your son because I loved him, not because I wanted what you could give me. That has not changed. What has changed is my willingness to stay where I am not valued." Ethan flinched, his voice rough, when he finally spoke. "Mother, please," he said. "Stop. This is not about a bracelet. You know it. I know it. She has been trying for months to fit into something that was never made for her. That is on us, not her." Vivian looked at him as if he had grown a second head. "You are really taking her side," she said. In front of him, Ethan straightened. It was small, but it was there, a hint of the man Mia had believed he could be. "I am taking my wife's side," he replied. "Something I should have done a long time ago. Whether we stay married or not, she deserved that." The honesty of it seemed to stun everyone into silence. Alexander watched his daughter's face carefully, gauging how deeply those words landed. There was pain there, but also a strange sense of closure. She nodded once, more to herself than anyone else. "I need time," she told Ethan. "Time away from all of this to decide what kind of life I want, and whether you fit into it. I will not make that decision in a room where everyone has something to lose or gain from it." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, to beg, to promise the world. In the end, all he said was, "I will wait. I will work on being someone you would choose again, not because you are trapped, but because you are free." Vivian turned away with a huff, but even she seemed to understand that the ground had shifted beyond her control. "Come, Gregory," she snapped to the attorney. "We have work to do." They left with the brittle dignity of people who had been forced to see their reflection in an unflattering mirror. When the door closed, the room felt oddly larger. Alexander exhaled quietly and moved around the desk, leaning against the edge so he was closer to Mia. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Mia let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. "Like someone just took a sledgehammer to the life I thought I had, and somehow I am relieved to see the cracks," she said. "That sounds about right," Alexander replied. "Sometimes you do not know how unstable something is until pressure shows you." She studied him for a moment. "You planned this," she said. "Not the bracelet, not the exact words. But you already knew about the company. You were waiting." "I was watching," he corrected gently. "I did not intervene because you asked me not to. I did not want to be the one pulling the strings in your marriage. But the moment they put their hands on something that symbolized your place in this family, and did it to make you smaller, they invited me into the conversation." Mia looked down at her bracelet, then back up. "So what now?" she asked. "Do I just become the billionaire's daughter again, and let everyone say I ran home to my last name the second things got hard? What if instead," Alexander said, "you chose to decide what that last name means on your own terms?" He nodded toward her sketchbook on the sofa. "You have spent years drawing in the margins of other people's lives. Come work with me for a while. Not as a mascot, as a partner." Collins Foundation has a wing that funds community arts programs. They are talented, but they lack someone who understands both the creative side and what it feels like to stand on the outside looking in. That is you, whether you like it or not. The idea landed in her chest like a small, bright stone, heavy enough to feel real. For the first time, her father was not offering her a safety net. He was offering her a platform. "I will not be your charity project," she said quietly. "Good," he answered. "I am fresh out of charity projects. I am only interested in allies." The corner of her mouth lifted. Somewhere between the bracelet on her wrist and the skyline outside the window, a new version of her life began to take shape, one in which she was not just reacting to what other people did to her, but choosing her own direction. 3 months later, the city felt different to Mia, not because the streets had changed, but because she had. The Collins Foundation's new community arts center stood in a converted warehouse space on the edge of a neighborhood most developers had once ignored. Now, the old brick walls held canvases instead of dust, and the high ceilings that used to echo with emptiness now hummed with voices and music and laughter. Tonight, the center glowed with soft light as people moved slowly through the main gallery, pausing to study paintings and sketches created by kids, single parents, and quiet people who had never believed their work belonged on a wall. Mia stood near the entrance, a simple black dress skimming her knees, her hair pulled back, her silver bracelet resting against her wrist like it had always been there. A small placard by the door read, "Opening Night, Belonging, a community exhibition, curated by Mia Collins." Every time she glanced at it, a part of her wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. She had not become a billionaire's daughter again. She had become something else, a woman who used access, money, and power to open doors instead of close them. Across the room, Alexander spoke with a city council member, but his eyes drifted back to Mia every few minutes, as if he still needed to reassure himself that she was really here, really standing in her own space, not another polished cage. He caught her eye, lifted his glass slightly, and she smiled in return. The relationship between them was still healing, full of old scars and new beginnings, but for the first time, it felt like a partnership instead of a tug-of-war. Ward Enterprises had survived the audit, but not without consequence. Several board members had resigned. Vivian had stepped back from public roles, citing health reasons. The charitable shells had been dismantled, and real funds had begun to flow into actual causes, including, ironically, the very arts center Mia now ran. The press never connected all the dots, but people whispered. Some said Alexander Collins had threatened the wards. Others said he had rescued them. Only a handful of people understood that the truth was more complicated, that what he had really done was draw a line and quietly insist that the people on the other side treat his daughter like a human being instead of an accessory. Mia. She turned at the sound of her name. Ethan stood near the doorway, hands tucked nervously into the pockets of a suit that was a little less perfect than usual. His hair was slightly longer, his eyes more tired, but there was a steadiness in his shoulders that had not been there before. He had texted her a week ago, asking if he could attend the opening, promising to respect whatever boundary she drew. She had taken her time before saying yes. Now he stood in front of her, looking around the gallery with genuine awe. "You did this," he said softly. "All of this." "Not alone," she answered. "But I helped." He nodded, his eyes flicking to her bracelet, then back to her face. "I moved out of the estate," he said without preamble. "I have an apartment downtown now. Small, noisy, terrible parking. I love it. My mother does not have a key." The image made her smile despite herself. "That must have been a fun conversation," she said. "It was not," he admitted. "But I had it anyway. I have been in therapy for the first time in my life. I have said out loud that I let fear of disappointing her matter more than protecting you. I have started to fix it. Not to impress you, because it was wrong." There was no grand speech in his words, no dramatic plea, just quiet facts laid out like bricks in a path. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked gently. "Because I needed you to know that whether you choose me or not, I am not going back to that version of myself," he said. "The one who stayed silent while you were stripped of things that mattered to you. I do not want to be that man, even if the consequence is losing you for good." Her throat tightened. She studied him for a long moment, hearing the noises of the gallery around them, the murmur of voices, the soft music, the distant sound of her father laughing with someone in a corner. She thought about the life she was building here, about the people who walked into this space and saw their work on the walls and finally felt like they belonged somewhere. I will not go back to your mother's house, she said. Not to live, not to perform. If there is an us, it exists out here, where we decide what it looks like, not in a dining room where someone else writes the rules. Ethan nodded, emotion flickering across his face. Good, he said, because I already told her that. I told her my marriage, if I am lucky enough to still have one, will not be another prop in her version of success. The words landed between them, simple and heavy. Mia took a breath. I am not ready to promise forever tonight, she said. But I am ready to see who you are becoming. I am willing to try, slowly, without pretending the past did not happen. Relief washed over his features, mixed with respect. Then I will earn whatever pieces of your trust you are willing to offer, he replied. Even if it takes the rest of my life. She extended her hand. He took it, not like a man claiming something, but like someone accepting a gift he did not deserve but would not waste again. Across the room, Alexander watched them for a moment. He did not interfere. He simply saw the way his daughter stood, shoulders back, eyes clear, her hand resting lightly in Ethan's while the bracelet on her wrist caught the light above the words belonging on the exhibition sign. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights in the gallery were dimmed, Mia walked alone between the canvases. She paused in front of a small painting by a teenage girl from a shelter, a picture of a house with wide open doors and no fences. Her fingers brushed her bracelet. For the first time, the metal did not just mean where she had come from. It meant everything she had chosen since. She had walked through humiliation, through silence, through the weight of other people's expectations, and she had stepped out the other side not as someone's accessory, but as a woman standing firmly in her own story. Her husband's family had stripped her in shame. Her billionaire father had struck back silently. But in the end, the most powerful thing was not what they did for or against her. It was the moment she finally decided that she, all by herself, was never going to be the one who made herself small again.